What happens when actors who've spent years pretending to save the galaxy are suddenly asked to actually do it? That's the deceptively simple idea at the heart of one of the most unexpectedly sincere science fiction films ever made. On the surface, it looks like a comedy, bright costumes, exaggerated performances, and a premise that borders on absurd. But beneath that exterior is something far more deliberate, a story about identity, legacy, and why fiction matters. The film begins by presenting its central characters as people stuck in time. Once celebrated stars of a cult television series, they now drift from convention to convention, repeating old lines for fans who care far more about the show than they do. There's a quiet bitterness underneath the humor. These are people defined by roles they no longer respect, performing for audiences who refuse to let them move on. That foundation is essential, because the story doesn't stay a parody for long. As the narrative unfolds, something subtle but important happens. The irony begins to fade. The jokes remain, but the film stops treating its world like a punchline. The characters, once exaggerated reflections of tired archetypes, are gradually asked to become something real. And remarkably, they rise to the occasion. What could have been a simple spoof transforms into a genuine adventure. The stakes feel tangible. The danger matters. And the emotional arcs, particularly the journey from cynicism to belief, land with surprising weight. That shift is the film's defining strength. It doesn't mock the genre it comes from. It understands it. Behind the scenes, that same balance between chaos and intention played out in unexpected ways. At one point during production, part of the main set, designed to look sleek and futuristic, began to physically deteriorate under the intense heat of studio lighting. Materials warped, surfaces peeled, and carefully constructed illusions started breaking apart. The crew had to improvise solutions on the fly, adapting under pressure to keep filming on track. It's an oddly fitting parallel to the story itself, a group of people trying to hold something together while everything threatens to fall apart. Creative disagreements also shaped the final film in ways audiences never saw. Early in development, there was a fundamental divide over the tone and casting of the lead character. One vision leaned more theatrical and dramatic, while another pushed toward a broader, more accessible comedic approach. That conflict ultimately led to a change in direction, and with it, a version of the film that felt warmer, more earnest, and more emotionally grounded. It's one of those rare cases where compromise didn't dilute the idea. It refined it. Even the marketing struggled to capture what the film actually was. Early promotional material leaned heavily into the comedy, presenting it as light, disposable entertainment. But that angle missed the deeper appeal. Audiences walked in expecting something trivial and often found themselves surprised by how invested they became. Over time, word of mouth corrected that first impression. What initially seemed like a niche comedy gradually revealed itself as something with lasting resonance. The inspiration behind the story came from a very real observation: what it means for an actor to become inseparable from a single role. For performers tied to iconic characters, the line between identity and performance can blur in complicated ways. That idea, of being both defined and confined by something beloved, runs quietly through the entire film. It gives the comedy a core of authenticity. Interestingly, the tone wasn't always as accessible as the final version suggests. Early cuts of the film leaned sharper, with more explicit language and a more biting edge. But studio decisions led to a softer approach, toning down some of the harsher elements in favor of a broader audience. In this case, that shift arguably strengthened the story. The warmth that replaced the cynicism allowed the emotional beats to land more cleanly. Some of the film's most memorable elements were never meant to last. A recurring line, initially written as a placeholder, ended up staying simply because nothing else was funnier. Over time, repetition turned it into something more than a joke. By the end of the story, it carries genuine emotional weight, transforming from parody into something almost poetic. Visually, the film also makes a clever transition that many viewers don't consciously notice. At a key moment, when the characters fully cross from illusion into reality, the frame itself expands. It's a subtle signal, but it marks the point where everything changes. The story is no longer confined. The world has opened up, and the film wants you to feel that shift. Even the design of the spaceship reflects the careful balancing act behind the scenes. Legal constraints forced the creators to avoid resembling familiar sci-fi icons too closely. Instead of limiting creativity, those restrictions pushed the design in a more original direction. The result feels recognizable without being derivative, a tribute that stands on its own. Performance choices played a huge role in grounding the film. Rather than leaning into caricature, several actors approached their roles with complete sincerity. One in particular insisted on treating his character not as a joke, but as a person with real frustrations and dignity. That decision anchors some of the film's most powerful moments. Without it, the emotional payoff wouldn't exist. The same philosophy extended to the film's technical side. Instead of using intentionally cheap effects for comedic value, the production invested in high-quality visuals. The environments, creatures, and space sequences were crafted with genuine care. That realism makes the humor sharper, not weaker. When the world feels believable, the absurdity within it becomes even funnier. There's also a deep layer of affection woven throughout the film. References to classic science fiction aren't presented as jokes, they're integrated naturally, almost quietly. For those who recognize them, they add depth. For those who don't, they simply enrich the world. It's the difference between imitation and understanding. And that understanding didn't go unnoticed. The film received recognition from within the science fiction community itself, an unusual achievement for a comedy. It was embraced not just as entertainment, but as something that genuinely contributed to the genre. That kind of acceptance speaks to how well it captured the spirit of what it was celebrating. Perhaps the most telling response came from actors associated with the very stories the film draws from. Rather than rejecting the parody, they embraced it. They saw in it something accurate, something respectful, and something true. That's ultimately why the film endures. It isn't just a comedy about science fiction. It's a story about the people who create it, the audiences who love it, and the strange, powerful connection between the two. It understands that fiction can shape identity, build communities, and offer meaning in ways that extend far beyond the screen. And instead of making fun of that idea, it treats it with the sincerity it deserves. That's the difference between a parody that fades and one that lasts.